Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Budden. I'm the CEO of Phase. Phase is a group of 11 people in Taipei and Berlin trying to help people enjoy being creative. We build digital design software. Before I get too deep into it, is there anybody here who has heard of Phase before? Jeez. Okay, that's quite a few, actually, compared to what we usually do, since we're not launched yet. But I didn't come here today to give you guys an advertisement for Phase. I came here to talk about helping people enjoy being creative, specifically in digital design, and how this is different from print design. The last couple of years, especially the last 2 years, we've had a new design tool every 1 or 2 months. Something comes out. We really believe that all of these things are built on top of a broken foundation. So we believe specifically that they are built as add-ons on top of print design software, and that digital design is fundamentally different. It deserves its own tools, and once we build those tools, we can stop working directly in code. Because digital design is the only creative software space where we have to work both as a designer and a programmer at the same time. Every other creative software space out there, whether it's video or audio or images or whatever it is, it always goes through these same 3 steps of it's not possible, and then code makes it possible, and then visual tools make it accessible and easy and fast for everybody. But digital designers today, they have to be a designer and coder at the same time, and we're stuck at step number 2. And people say that that's because digital design, websites and apps, they're just too complex and too complicated to be done visually. They're too dynamic. You need to do them directly in code. But if you stop and you think about that for a second, anything in this room can be modeled with visual CAD software. We can make video games in visual software. We can do all kinds of things that are much more complicated and much more dynamic than websites and apps using visual software. The reason why we can't do that today as designers is not because it's not possible, it's because we're using print design software and things built on top of print design software to try to do digital design today. So today, we'll walk through a couple things that we believe about the tools that we're using today. And we'll try to explain why we believe these are really just print design software morphed to be a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more for digital design. We'll start with the basics. So these basic things, we call them basics because we're surprised that they have not been solved yet. They're problems that we designers deal with every single day, and the visual tools that we have just do not address them. The first is that screens are not pages. Our design tools today still use a printed page, literally. When you start a new design, you start by creating a page with 500 pixels wide, 800, whatever. That's not how websites and apps actually work. They have dynamically sized screens. So what we have to do today instead is we have to copy and paste our design multiple different times and take your artboard and copy it and paste it and make it 200 pixels wider and then copy it again and then paste it again and then make it 200 pixels wider to try to get something that is actually responsive working. The reason, again, is because we're using printed pages in our design software. That websites and apps do not use printed pages. They use screens that are dynamic for different screen sizes. Second is layout. Websites and apps have layout. They have rows and columns that adapt to the content inside of them or content that adapts to the layout that is around it. This is how websites and apps work. This is not how our design tools work. This is a really basic thing that is surprising that it has not been solved yet. Constraints are not enough. Constraints come from Xcode, and they make a lot of sense there because you're building for one iPhone version or a different iPhone version, and they're very close together, so just using constraints, that's fine. But when you get into doing websites and apps where you need to design a website that works on desktop browsers and then on mobile or whatever you're doing, constraints just don't do it. You might need to show something on a large screen and hide it on a small, or maybe you need rows on a large screen and columns on a small, or whatever. The fact that our design tools cannot do this yet is a little bit crazy. Libraries. So I actually didn't understand the last talk, but I think it was about design systems. So this is the design systems that we're using today So the code that he was showing was different, but in the visual tools that we're using today, it's all based on SVG symbols, which is, again, something coming from print. Being based on SVG symbols, I mean pulled directly from the SVG symbols technical spec to get reusable elements. But design systems today go much, much deeper than just reusable elements. The easiest design system to look at that everybody is familiar with is Google Material. You have not just reusable elements, but reusable shadows and reusable fills and reusable brand colors. And you compose your elements through all of these different things. But the design systems that we're using in our tools today, they're not based on the way that they work in the real world. They're based on the way that they work in SVG, which really needs to change. A couple other things that are just more annoyances than anything with design systems is working out of context. So if you're taken to a symbols page, every time you try to make an edit, and then you go back to your design, and then you can't see in context while you're editing it, and you have to go back and forth all of the time. Better overrides for per property overrides and so on. Basically just making it work like it works in the real world. In digital elements. In print, the fundamental elements that we use are just text and shapes. We just take text and shapes and we build up from there. When we're designing for digital, it's a lot more than that. It's form elements, it's video, it's audio, it's custom elements like a Google Maps embed, whatever. We have to design for this stuff, and this stuff has different behaviors than we have in print. We have focus states for inputs, we have active, we have all of these different things. Then we have actual states. Websites and apps, elements have states. Our design tools don't. This is a really, really basic thing that we as designers need, because the way that we do this today is like this. We copy and paste a button a couple different times. We design it a couple different times. And then we walk over to engineers and we say, between default and hover, I really want it to do something like this. And then we try to describe what we would really like it to do. And then they try to build that for us. Elements inside of our design tools need states. And then interactions. So this is where most designers, we turn to code. So we either turn to code or we turn to a person who knows how to code, and we ask them for help. When we use visual tools, they're always limited. They can do something, you can do a quick little prototype, but if you want to build a website that has 15 different pages or an app that has 50 different interactions on the page, doing that with visual tools today is really, really hard. It's really, really time consuming. So we don't do this. What we do instead is we take this 50 interactive element mobile app, we design 5 interactions on it, and we use that as a visual reference, and we give it to engineers and we ask them to build it, and it takes a very long time. And the belief is that visual tools, like I was saying before, just are not powerful enough to do fully functional interactive prototypes where every button works, everything works. But again, that doesn't make sense. We can do a lot more difficult things than websites and apps. It's because our tools are still print software. And specifically, the reason why visual tools have always been considered limited is because we're not breaking it down. We're not breaking it into the most fundamental building blocks of what are interactions. What we do instead is we take an artboard and we copy paste it, we make some changes, and then in the middle here, we take a pre-made interaction for slide up or fade out or fade in or whatever it is. But that's not how we do any kind of design. We don't do any kind of design with pre-made templates, at least not at a professional level. This would be like trying to do visual design by starting with only a set of icons in clip art, and you don't have a pen tool, you don't have any way to create your own elements. This is how we're doing interactions in visual tools today. What we really need to do is break it down into building blocks. So if we look at visual design, the building blocks are things like shapes, text, colors, fills, borders. We give these building blocks to designers, and then we let them build up to whatever level of complexity that they need. Interaction design is not different. If we give designers building blocks in a visual tool that break down interactions into the most fundamental pieces and give them these instead of templates, then designers can compose these up into any interaction that they need without ever touching code. And we know what these building blocks are because they are the same building blocks that coders use. They are just put into visual software. It's things like selectors. So I want to select every component on my page, but only when it's a child of this other component, and only every second one, or something like that. It's things like events. So I want to take that selector and I want to connect it to a click event. So when I click that component, do something. It's things like simple conditions, like if-else. If this thing is true, do one thing. If something else is true, do something else. And simple expressions. So how many of this component are on the page? We're going to have a different behavior based on that. All of this stuff can be visual. It does not need to be done in code. It doesn't need to be this idea of, in modern design, which is we need to make coding easier for designers so that they can do interaction design. Just doesn't make sense. It's because our tools are stuck in the past. And then you can put them together to make event interactions. In the same way that you do in code, you can do it in visual tools. Along with continuous interactions as well, like drag and resize and so on. Now, another big difference between print design and digital design is dynamic content. So websites and apps have dynamic content. You have a page that's going to load something different in there at different times. And when you load something different, your design is going to behave differently. If you put a different language in there, it could break your design. If you load a longer blog post, it could break your design. There's no reason that we designers should not be using data that comes directly from our company's database and designing on top of it. There's no technical reason, there's no security reason, the only reason is that the tools don't do that yet. There's no reason that if we're pulling from YouTube that we cannot use real YouTube data and so on. And there's also no reason that the design inside of our visual tools cannot adapt to that. And when you do all this in a visual tool, when you have layout and you have interactions and you have real data and you have all of these different things, you can build prototypes that actually work. They don't have any of the back-end functionality in there, but everything is mocked up, so every button works, every page works, every scroll interaction works, every drop-down works. Everything that you need in order to go and do user testing works. And you can do that as a designer without ever needing to go to engineering. So instead of this weeks-long process where you go doing design and then interaction and then you give it to engineering and then they build it and then you do user testing and then you figure out what's wrong and then you go back to the beginning, you can do all of that as a designer before you ever go to the engineering team. The only reason why we cannot do this today is because, again, we're using print design software with things built on top of it. The way that we share as designers has been broken for quite a while. This will be a bit easier to explain here. There's been different tools for version control for designers. There's been maybe a new one every 6 months, more or less. And every time a new tool has come out, they've asked themselves, are designers like programmers? Do they need Git? Or are designers like, say, writers? Do they need real-time collaboration? Which one are they? Which one are designers? And the answer is that they are neither of those things. They are designers. They are different. They need something built for designers. And really, they need a combination of both of those things. They need version control and they need real-time collaboration. So what we're building in a phase is version control, but simplified. So take 90% of Git, get rid of it. Just basic branching and merging. And then real-time collaboration as well, but only when you want it. So if you create a branch of your design file, you can choose to work on it alone if you don't want to feel like somebody is watching you designing, or you can invite someone to collaborate in real time with you. And shared files among organizations. So I think it speaks to the state of design tools that there are actually a lot of design tools that let you do this, but most design teams still use email. Because the design tools that are out there just, they always take a programmer's workflow and try to make it work for designers, or someone else's workflow and try to make it work for designers and so on, rather than thinking about designers from first principles and building something for the way that designers actually work. So this exporting code. So this is a big topic. How many people write code here? Okay. There have been a lot of tools that do some kind of exporting code. And the code which they export is always terrible. You cannot use it. The machine-generated code from every tool that has come before. Now, there's two reasons why you can't use the code from these other tools. And the first is that the tools that have exported code before have only had control over one step of the design process. So they would only be doing visual design, or they would only be doing interactions, or something like that. And then they would try to use some kind of AI to generate the parts that they don't have, which never works. In Phase, we're building all of these things explicitly. So a designer defines the layout, a designer defines the interactions, the designer defines everything. They say exactly what they want. There is no machine guessing at it. So it's not actually a generation, it's a translation. It's taking working code from inside of Phase and turning it into working code in the language that you need. And the language that you need, a little bit deeper than that, but the code that you need is the other reason why generated code has never made a real impact before. Because every engineering team in the world is different. They need, even if they're using the same language, they need a different style, they need different libraries, they need different whatever. Your tool cannot tell the engineering team how the code is going to work. It has to be the other way around. Engineers need to be able to configure how code is going to get exported. All of that needs to be opened up through API. The last thing that I want to talk about as far as the digital design ecosystem is, surprisingly, in digital design, we don't have shared assets at scale. Anytime we want to make something, we make it again. There are little websites out there where you can find an icon or something like that, but if you want every designer in the world to share templates with each other, that's not something that we're really able to do yet. And then API. So the design tools that we use today are strangely separated by technology type. So you have bitmap editors and vector editors, rather than separated on workflow type. So you'll find a lot of designers today that keep Photoshop open in another tab because sometimes they need to do bitmap editing, even though the web design tools that they have just have no way to do that. But we don't want to throw every bitmap thing possible into the product, so we'll open that up through API. So Phase is coming in a couple weeks. For those of you who have not heard of it, this might look kind of familiar. There's a timeline with a bunch of bars. You've probably seen something like that before. Sidebars in the same place, and layers is in the same place, and so on and so forth. But when you put something like this together that looks familiar, but under it is this model of basic building blocks of interaction and digital design. These things like selectors and events and states on elements and layouts and all of these things built into something that you're already familiar with, you know how it works, but it takes out these pre-made things, gives you instead the tools to build anything that you want, and lets you move out of code so that you can build interactive websites, interactive apps where every single button works, every page works, without ever touching code. In the prototype that we've built so far, we've given this to people who are experts in interaction design code, and we've given it to beginners. The timing is different for each of them, but it goes from about 5 minutes to 15 minutes doing this in existing tools to literally about 5 seconds when we give them Phase. It takes no time at all to create a selector and say, on click, I'm going to change this state. So this is something that's coming next week. You guys are the first to hear about this. If you guys want to get a copy of Phase magazine, we've connected with designers all over the world. We have about 16,000, 17,000 designers signed up for the first version of Phase that's coming in about six weeks, give or take. We've connected with quite a few of them to put this together, to go in depth on design articles. If you guys want a copy of this, it's coming out next Tuesday, Wednesday, more or less. Just go to phase.com/magazine. You can sign up, and you can get a copy of this when it comes out. Free, by the way. One last thing, I'm here in Moscow for a couple more days. So if anybody has any questions about Phase, or as a company just wants to talk about design or whatever, you guys can send me an email. One other thing to mention is that one of my co-founders building Phase speaks Russian. So if you want to email him instead of me, and email and speak in Russian, he is Vlad, so VLAD @phase.com. You can send an email in Russian, and he will be able to get back to you. Thanks, guys. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks. Кто-нибудь?
Hello, thank you very much. It's going to be a great instrument, I believe. Sorry if I missed that. The story is all about that a designer doesn't need a developer. So developer makes a tool, and designer makes a product with this tool. And what if he needs some very, very custom element? Yes, I see API, but does he need to find some developer and take him and ask, so write me, code something for me?
It depends how custom, and then this ties back into this as well. So something I did not mention is that the community API, it's not just for bitmap editing stuff, it's also for this. So if someone in the world has the same problem, they can build this one time. They can build a custom element one time, say a Google Maps embed element. An engineer will need to build that, but they need to build it one time, and then they can share it to the community, and then every other designer, they can go and they can find this custom Google Maps element, which doesn't require any code, that somebody made. So this sharing level that we're trying to build on top of this is how we're hoping to fix that.
And do you think will it make a push for designers to learn code? If you even didn't mean that.
So I think it's good if designers do know how to code, the same way it's good if engineers know something about design for the communication between the two of them. But for us, if I go all the way back to the start, something that we really believe in that I didn't get into, well, the reason why we build this company at all is this idea of creative flow. So if you look at print design, for example, this creative flow where you have an idea and then you try it and then you see how it looks and that gives you a different idea and then you try it in this back and forth and this constant experimentation. In digital design, this doesn't really happen anymore because people sit and they think for hours about, do I really want to commit to doing this design? Because once I start to do it, it's going to take me 2 days to design this and do a mock-up and get it into code before I can even see what I'm seeing in my imagination in real life. The reason for that, we believe, is code. Even the prototype that we have so far, it takes 5 seconds to do what it takes someone like 15 minutes to do in code today. It takes 5 seconds in Phase. The reason why we care about that is not because, cool, it's fast, it's because of creative flow. When we get rid of that friction, we can go back to creative flow. So to answer your question, we don't think that designers should need to code. They should be able to use visual tools.
So your main goal is to make hands as fast as mine, yes?
Well, we aim to be as fast as we can. We're never going to be as fast as thinking and then seeing it in real time. But as close as we can get to pen and paper, the better.
Thank you.
Hello. What about other instruments? Are you going to integrate with Sketch or Figma or
so the first version
other competitors?
Yeah, the first version of Phase that's coming out is all about interactions. So it is directly integrated with Sketch. You import your Sketch files and you build interactions on top of it. Now later we will do design directly inside of Phase and so on. We will do whatever integrations the community wants. So we're 100% open to it. Sketch is an example of a really good tool. I think that there's other tools out there that we would be less enthusiastic about integrating with just because we believe that they exist in this weird space where they're built on top of other broken stuff, and if we could just go under it and fix this stuff instead, then we wouldn't have to integrate with it. But like I said, anything the community wants, if they want it, we'll integrate with it.
Thank you.
I've got some question. Same question. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Hello. Will your product work on Windows?
Yeah. So this is a big deal for us. I don't know what it's like in Russia with Windows and Mac, but we live in a place where not every designer can afford a Mac. So
Yeah.
we care about it a lot.
And
Short answer is yes.
and what will be the pricing approximate?
We're not sure. So we're doing research projects trying to figure this out now. We don't really know yet, but nothing crazy.
Hi, Nick. Thanks. Phase looks great. One question. Is it going to have a web version?
Yeah, so it's built web, Mac, PC, Linux, whatever, and then it's built to run in the browser or run on desktop with no internet connection, including with collaboration. So if you two guys are working on it, one goes offline and they both continue working, it's fine. So some of that stuff is going to roll out after V1, but it's all being built that way.
Thanks. Sounds great.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for coming us.